Model 2000 is a design which I believe promises to dominate autoloader development in the 21st century to the same degree that John Browning's classic recoil-operated patent of 1898 has dominated the 20th century. Dick Metcalf, editor, Shooting Times, 1991. Well, the Colt All-American Model 2000 didn't really dominate much of anything when it came out, unfortunately. This was Colt's attempt to get into the so-called Wonder Nine world that was pretty much dominated by Glock in the 1990s. It's a pistol with an all-polymer frame, steel slide, has a double-stack, high-capacity magazine. It's striker-fired, so you could say double action only. Really checks all the boxes that you would want for a modern, or 1990s, military and police service pistol. Colt really had high hopes for this. They thought it would make them a ton of money and really help rejuvenate their business. Unfortunately, it turned into a gigantic disaster for them instead. What actually happened is that these pistols had tremendous problems with both accuracy and reliability. And to top it off, they were actually also subject to a safety recall. So where did this thing come from? Well, it wasn't actually designed by Colt. The major elements in it were patented by Reed Knight, well known of Knight's Manufacturing, and Eugene Stoner, even more well-known, designer of the AR-15. They designed a pistol mostly like this. They built some prototypes. They were really good. And they sold the rights to develop this pistol to Colt, who was in the market at the time. Colt made a bunch of changes. The originals were a little shorter in the grip, shorter in the barrel. I believe the originals were actually a single-stack magazine. Colt made a bunch of these changes because they thought it would make it more appealing to their target audience. And then when these went into mass production, they really kind of screwed the pooch on the manufacturing setup for them. And they took what had been an accurate and reliable pistol and turned it into an inaccurate and unreliable one. We'll take a look at exactly why in a minute. But first, I figured we'd put a couple shots through, see if it runs for us. Take a look at this trigger pull. Frankly, the All-American 2000 is about the only gun I've ever shot that can honestly give the VP70 a run for its money in terms of trigger length and trigger weight. That's part of the problem is Colt's liability attorneys decided that rather than the 6-pound trigger pull that Knight and Stoner had designed, they wanted a 12-pound trigger pull in it, and that's what you get, in addition to it being very long. Now mechanically, the All-American 2000 has a somewhat unusual, although it's becoming more common these days, has a rotating barrel locking mechanism and a short recoil system. So the idea is the bolt, or the barrel and the slide remain locked together for the first couple millimeters of travel, backward. Then they unlock, the barrel rotates, locking lugs disengage, and then the slide can cycle back and forth to eject the empty case and load a new one. So let's take a closer look at the internals of exactly how that works. Disassembly of the American 2000 is actually quite simple. What we're going to do is lock the slide all the way to the rear. You'll notice we have this big, huge slide stop, which I actually really like. That's a cool feature. You're not going to easily miss that under stress. Anyway, lock the slide back, and then we take this pin, and we just push it all the way out. Drop the slide stop. The slide slides very nicely right off the front of the gun. Let's start by taking a look at the trigger back here, because that's the most unusual part of the design. What we have is it's a straight, there's no pivoting, it travels in a perfectly straight line backward and forward. And the main element that Knight and Stoner patented was this use of roller bearings on the trigger. And the idea was those would give you a very smooth and slick trigger pull, which kind of, I think, worked in the prototypes. But when you up the spring pressure on this thing to 12 pounds, it's a losing battle. You're not going to win. There is a round surface here that operates this guy. This is what actually pulls on the striker, this metal tab right here. So when this is in the gun, we put the rollers in down there, pivot the trigger in. This sheet metal piece sits around that round bearing, just like that. And as you can see, when you pull all the way back, the striker, this sheet metal piece, drops at the very end of pull. That releases the striker so it can fire, travels back to the front. It lifts up just slightly. It's a little hard to see, but it is happening right there. Lifts up. That engages this block with the striker itself. Pulling the trigger pulls it all the way rearward, about a ½ inch. And then this block drops down, which releases the striker, and under spring tension that flies forward and hits the cartridge. So this does technically have the advantage of allowing you to attempt to fire a second time, a cartridge that is a dud the first time. The downside to it is that every single trigger pull is this full, really long length of travel. Most striker-fired guns, like Glock, that was predominant at the time, had a setup where cycling the slide would actually cock much of the travel of the striker, so that your trigger pull only had to do a little bit of work, unlike the Colt design, where the trigger does all of the work. Now, this frame is entirely polymer, with the exception of a metal ejector here and a few pins and bits. The rails here are all polymer, and that's what the slide is primarily traveling on. The only piece of metal in the frame that the slide contacts is this little camming block. So there's about 1 inch of metal rail travel. All the rest is free to wear, and probably does quite quickly. Then this actually gets into the slide portion of the gun. So let's take this apart. We've got a captive recoil spring. That's a good idea. We have a barrel bushing that's a solid 1 inch long. That's kind of a bad idea. What makes it a worse idea is that they actually mounted the front sight on the barrel bushing. So as the lockup of the barrel bushing wears over time, your front sight starts to get wobbly. And as you can see, the barrel bushing does quite a lot of the guidance for the barrel, keeping it pointed in the same direction each shot. So again, as the barrel bushing connection wears, your accuracy is going to degrade. The barrel itself has 4 locking lugs around its circumference here. Those lock into matching recesses in the slide. And then it has 1 cam lug right there. And that camming lug interacts with this block and causes the barrel to rotate just slightly, maybe 10, maybe 15 degrees, just enough to pull these locking lugs out of engagement with their matching recesses. Okay, so what we have here now is the slide, the barrel, and the locking block in place. The gun is currently in its fully locked position. The barrel's not moving. These locking lugs are fully engaged in their locking recesses. When I fire the gun, the block here stays in place because it's held in the frame, and then the slide retracts on top of it. As you can see, that first bit of movement, nothing happens right there. Then the cam in this block rotates the barrel, and you can see the locking lugs here coming out of their recesses. And then, this is a little sticky because obviously it's meant to be in the frame, then the barrel stays where it is and the slide cycles backwards, allowing you to eject the spent case and load a new one. Spring tension, the main spring, pulls the slide back forward. When it gets to the last bit of travel, that cam in the block takes effect again, locks the barrel up, and you're ready for your next shot. Let's go ahead and reassemble it. We put the locking block, the rollers here run inside the locking block. Then the front roller goes into the frame. Pivot the trigger down. There we go. So there's that bit. Now, let's reassemble the slide. Wow, this thing's hot. All right, once you've got the slide, all the slide pieces reassembled, we've got the block in the frame. Reassembly is quite easy. We just slide the slide onto the frame, pull it all the way back, lock it open, push this cross pin back in, and we're back in business. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and tune in again to ForgottenWeapons.com for more defunct modern automatic pistols.